Luxury cruise ships are designed to symbolize freedom. Endless ocean views, music drifting across open decks, families laughing under Caribbean sunsets. For millions of travelers each year, these floating cities promise escape from stress, danger, and everyday worries. But sometimes, the illusion of safety can hide something far darker. In November, what began as a joyful Caribbean vacation for one Florida family would slowly transform into a nightmare that investigators are still trying to fully understand. An 18-year-old girl, described by loved ones as bright, cheerful, and full of promise, boarded a cruise ship expecting adventure, relaxation, and unforgettable memories. She never came home. New here? Don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss any of our latest videos. Anna Kepner was just beginning adulthood. According to family and friends, she was known for her strong academic performance, earning straight A's while maintaining an energetic personality that drew people toward her. She was described as bubbly, kind-hearted, and optimistic about her future, the type of teenager who appeared to have every opportunity ahead of her. Her family planned the cruise as a celebration, a chance to spend time together across generations. Anna traveled with her father, stepmother, grandparents, siblings, and step-siblings aboard the Carnival Horizon, a massive cruise ship capable of carrying thousands of passengers and crew members. The ship offered luxury accommodations, restaurants, entertainment venues, swimming pools, and carefully monitored security systems designed to protect passengers throughout the voyage. On paper, it was one of the safest vacation environments imaginable. Cruise ships operate under layers of surveillance. Cameras monitor hallways, public spaces, elevators, and entry points. Security staff patrol the vessel continuously. Passenger movements are tracked through electronic key systems. For many travelers, cruise ships create a sense of safety unmatched by hotels or resorts on land. Yet, safety systems can only work when danger is visible. Anna's final days aboard the cruise initially appeared completely normal. The family participated in vacation activities. They spent time exploring the ship, enjoying meals, and preparing for excursions scheduled during their Caribbean itinerary. Nothing suggested that tragedy was building quietly behind the scenes. Then, without warning, Anna disappeared. At first, her absence may have seemed routine. On cruise ships, passengers frequently separate to explore activities individually. Teenagers especially enjoy the independence cruise vacations provide. But as time passed and Anna failed to respond to messages or appear at family gatherings, concern began to grow. Soon, concern escalated into panic. Family members began searching common areas, entertainment decks, and guest cabins. Cruise staff were alerted. Security procedures began to activate. Announcements and internal searches became more urgent. Thousands of passengers remained unaware that a missing person search was unfolding around them. Somewhere on that enormous ship, investigators would later learn, Anna's fate had already been sealed. The discovery that followed shocked even seasoned investigators. Anna Kepner's body was eventually located inside a cabin, hidden beneath a bed. She had been wrapped in a blanket and concealed beneath life vests, an attempt that investigators believed suggested deliberate efforts to hide the crime. The circumstances of the discovery raised immediate and disturbing questions. How could someone conceal a body aboard a ship filled with surveillance cameras, security personnel, and thousands of witnesses? And perhaps even more unsettling, who would want to? The investigation quickly shifted from a missing person case to a suspected homicide. Authorities later confirmed that Anna's death was caused by mechanical asphyxia, a term used when external pressure prevents a person from breathing. While investigators have not released detailed public explanations of the exact circumstances, the classification of homicide made it clear that Anna's death was not accidental. As news of her death spread, shock waves rippled through the cruise industry and the broader public. Cruise vacations are marketed as controlled environments, isolated from many types of crime found on land. The idea that a teenager could be killed aboard such a vessel challenged deeply rooted assumptions about travel safety. But the most disturbing revelation was still to come. Early in the investigation, suspicion began focusing not on strangers, but within Anna's own extended family circle. Weeks later, court filings in an unrelated custody case identified Anna's stepbrother as a suspect. Because the individual was charged as a juvenile, authorities sealed all court records, preventing public access to specific details about the charges or evidence involved. This legal protection, common in cases involving minors, created an information vacuum. The FBI, federal prosecutors, and local authorities declined to publicly discuss the case. While this silence is standard in juvenile proceedings, it left the public and, in many ways, the grieving family facing a painful lack of clarity. Anna's father, Anna Kepner, would later confirm the arrest publicly, revealing that the suspect had been released into the custody of a guardian while legal proceedings continued. That decision sparked strong emotional reactions, particularly from Anna's parents, who issued a deeply personal public statement describing their grief and their ongoing search for justice. Their statement painted a portrait of unimaginable loss, parents struggling to accept that their daughter's life had ended in what they described as a violent and senseless act. They expressed gratitude towards federal investigators while also revealing frustration that the suspect remained free during the ongoing legal process. Perhaps most hauntingly, they revealed that they had remained silent for months at the request of federal investigators, believing their silence would help bring justice. Eventually, however, the weight of grief and unanswered questions compelled them to speak publicly, hoping to ensure that Anna's story would not fade from public attention. The case highlights one of the most chilling realities in true crime. Danger does not always come from strangers lurking in shadows. Sometimes it emerges from places where trust is strongest, families, friendships, and environments believed to be safe. For investigators, Anna Kepner's death presents complex challenges. Cruise ship crimes operate under complicated legal jurisdictions, often involving federal authorities, maritime law, and international travel regulations. Evidence collection, witness interviews, and crime scene preservation become far more difficult when events occur at sea. For families, the complexity becomes even more painful. Legal silence, sealed records, and prolonged investigations can delay closure for years. And for the public, cases like Anna's force uncomfortable questions about safety in environments designed to feel secure. As investigators continue working behind legal closed doors, one truth remains painfully clear. A young woman with a promising future lost her life under circumstances that remained partially hidden from public view. Anna Kepner boarded a cruise ship expecting memories of adventure. Instead, her story became a haunting reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers are not found in unfamiliar places, but in the spaces we trust the most. Vacations are supposed to create memories families revisit for years, snapshots of laughter, sunsets, and shared experiences that feel frozen in time. For the Kepner family, the Caribbean cruise aboard the Carnival Horizon began exactly that way. Photographs were taken, plans were made, and like countless families before them, they stepped onto the massive floating resort believing they were entering one of the safest vacation environments available. But tragedy rarely announces itself. It builds quietly, often disguised as ordinary moments no one realizes will later become the final normal memories. The Carnival Horizon is not a small vessel drifting quietly over open water. It is a floating city stretching nearly 1,000 feet long, carrying thousands of passengers and crew members across multiple depths filled with restaurants, theaters, swimming pools, entertainment lounges, shopping areas, and private cabins. With constant movement and endless distractions, cruise ships create an environment where passengers can easily separate and reunite without concern. For families traveling with teenagers, that independence often becomes part of the appeal. Older teens are given space to explore activities on their own while still remaining within what parents believe is a controlled and secure environment. Surveillance cameras cover most public areas, electronic key cards track cabin access, security teams monitor the vessel 24 hours a day. For many families, cruise ships feel safer than most resorts on land. When Anna Kepner boarded the ship with her family, she entered that world of controlled freedom. She traveled with her father, stepmother, grandparents, siblings, and step-siblings aboard the Carnival Horizon, a massive cruise ship capable of carrying thousands of passengers and crew members. The ship offered luxury accommodations, restaurants, entertainment venues, swimming pools, and carefully monitored security systems designed to protect passengers throughout the voyage. On paper, it was one of the safest vacation environments imaginable. Cruise ships operate under layers of surveillance. Cameras monitor hallways, public spaces, elevators, and entry points. Security staff patrol the vessel continuously. Passenger movements are tracked through electronic key systems. For many travelers, cruise ships' crime scenes do not always announce themselves through chaos or visible violence. Sometimes they exist in silence, hidden behind closed doors, concealed in places designed for comfort and privacy. For investigators aboard the Carnival Horizon, the discovery of Anna Kepner's body transformed a missing person search into something far darker, a homicide investigation unfolding in one of the most complicated environments law enforcement can face. By the time ship security teams gained access to the cabin where Anna was eventually found, urgency had already replaced hope. Searches had expanded across passenger decks, surveillance teams had reviewed public area footage, crew members had begun retracing the movements of passengers connected to her travel group. Each passing hour without locating Anna increased the likelihood investigators feared most. Cabins aboard cruise ships are unique investigative environments. Unlike hotel rooms on land, they are confined spaces surrounded by thousands of moving individuals, constant maintenance routines, and high passenger turnover. Evidence can be accidentally disturbed quickly. Housekeeping teams operate on tight schedules. Guests move freely between rooms. Every delay increases the risk that physical clues could disappear. When investigators entered the cabin, they were immediately confronted with a disturbing scene. Anna Kepner's body was discovered hidden beneath a bed, wrapped in a blanket and partially covered with life vests. The concealment itself became one of the earliest indicators that investigators were not dealing with an accidental death. In forensic investigations, body placement often tells investigators as much as visible injuries. Natural deaths or accidental suffocation cases typically occur in open, discoverable positions. Concealment strongly suggests intentional action, an effort to delay discovery, mislead investigators, or create confusion about the timeline of events. The presence of additional items, like life vests, raised even more questions about whether those objects were used to suppress movement, conceal evidence, or simply disguise the scene. Ship security personnel immediately sealed the cabin, converting it into an active crime scene. Cruise ship protocols require immediate coordination with federal authorities when serious crimes occur. Because the vessel carried U.S. citizens and departed from an American port, jurisdiction quickly shifted toward the Federal Bureau of Investigation. However, investigators faced a major obstacle from the very beginning. The ship was still at sea. Unlike land-based investigations where forensic teams can arrive within minutes or hours, maritime investigations often require waiting until the vessel reaches the nearest port where federal agents can board. During that time, ship security officers must preserve the crime scene using onboard training and limited forensic equipment. Every action must be documented carefully because defense attorneys later scrutinize every step taken before federal investigators arrive. While preserving the cabin, investigators began documenting the environment. Photographs were taken from multiple angles, bedding materials were secured, any personal items belonging to Anna or others in the cabin were cataloged. Investigators also examined the bed frame and surrounding furniture, searching for fibers, fingerprints, or biological traces that could indicate a struggle. One of the most critical early forensic steps involved determining the cause of death. Initial assessments can be limited in shipboard conditions, but investigators rely heavily on visible indicators, such as bruising, ligature marks, or signs of suffocation. When Anna's death certificate was later released, it identified the cause of death as mechanical asphyxia, a term that indicates oxygen deprivation caused by physical obstruction or external force restricting breathing. Mechanical asphyxia can occur in several ways. It may involve smothering with an object, compression of the chest or neck, or obstruction of airways. Forensic examiners typically search for evidence such as petechial hemorrhaging, small burst blood vessels around the eyes or face, along with internal trauma or defensive injuries that may indicate the victim attempted to resist. However, forensic clarity requires autopsy examination under controlled laboratory conditions. That meant investigators needed to transport Anna's body to medical examiners on land, where specialized equipment could confirm precise injury patterns, timeline estimations, and potential DNA evidence. Meanwhile, onboard investigators shifted focus toward reconstructing Anna's final known movements. Cruise ships rely heavily on electronic tracking systems. Every passenger carries a key card used to access cabins, purchase items, and enter restricted areas. These digital records allow investigators to track cabin entry times and movement patterns throughout the ship. Surveillance cameras positioned throughout hallways, elevators, and public areas provide additional visual timelines. Reviewing these systems becomes one of the most time-consuming but crucial steps in maritime homicide investigations. Investigators must track not only the victim's movements, but also anyone who interacted with her during critical time windows. In large ships carrying thousands of passengers, identifying relevant footage can require reviewing hundreds of hours of video. Investigators also began interviewing passengers and crew members. These interviews often start with individuals closest to the victim, family members, travel companions, and cabin occupants. Family-related investigations introduce emotional complexity. Loved ones who are simultaneously grieving may also hold critical information. Interviews must balance compassion with investigative necessity, a challenge that experienced agents navigate carefully. As investigators compiled witness statements, attention reportedly began shifting toward Anna's stepbrother. While authorities initially withheld public confirmation, references to him later surfaced in unrelated custody court filings. Those filings identified him as a suspect in Anna's death, triggering significant legal and public interest. The involvement of a juvenile suspect introduced a second layer of investigative difficulty. Juvenile criminal cases are protected under strict confidentiality laws designed to protect minors' identities and rehabilitation opportunities. Court documents become sealed, evidence discussions are restricted, public updates become limited or non-existent. While these protections serve legal purposes, they can complicate public understanding of a case. Families seeking transparency often struggle with limited information access. Media coverage becomes restricted to officially released statements. Speculation grows in the absence of detailed evidence disclosure. Forensic investigators continued examining the cabin environment for additional clues. Items like blankets, life vests, and bedding were tested for biological evidence, including skin cells, hair fibers, or bodily fluids. Investigators also examined patterns in how objects are positioned. For example, compression marks on blankets or furniture can reveal whether weight or force was applied during the incident. Another critical question investigators pursue involves timeline reconstruction. Determining the approximate time of death helps narrow suspect opportunity windows. Medical examiners rely heavily on body temperature, rigor mortis progression, stomach content analysis, and lividity patterns to estimate when death occurred. Cruise ship environments introduce additional challenges because cabin temperatures, air circulation, and body concealment can affect decomposition rates and forensic accuracy. Investigators also examine communication records. Text messages, onboard messaging apps, social media activity, and phone usage patterns may reveal emotional conflicts, planned meetings, or distress signals leading up to the incident. Digital forensic teams often analyze these communications alongside surveillance footage to identify behavioral changes or suspicious interactions. As evidence collection progressed, investigators faced growing pressure from both family members and federal prosecutors to build a legally sustainable case. Homicide investigations involving juveniles require particularly strong evidence because prosecution standards differ and rehabilitation-focused sentencing structures may influence legal strategy. Public statements from Anna's parents later revealed both appreciation and frustration toward investigators. They expressed gratitude for the FBI's professionalism while also voicing distress over the suspect's release into guardian custody during legal proceedings. Their statements highlighted a painful reality for many families involved in juvenile homicide cases. Accountability processes often unfold slowly and privately. Meanwhile, investigators continued assembling forensic reports, witness testimonies, surveillance timelines, and digital evidence into a cohesive narrative capable of withstanding court scrutiny. Maritime homicide cases are rare but notoriously complex, requiring coordination between international maritime law, federal jurisdiction, cruise line policies, and juvenile legal protections. And through all of it, one central truth remains at the heart of the investigation. Every piece of evidence recovered from that cabin, every digital record analyzed, every forensic report filed represents an attempt to answer one unbearable question. What happened inside that room during Anna Kepner's final moments? Because somewhere within sealed court records and ongoing forensic analysis lies a story that investigators continue working to uncover, a story hidden beneath blankets, life vests, and unanswered timelines drifting across international waters. And until that full story is revealed, the cabin where Anna... What happens when investigators begin looking not outside the victim's world, but directly inside it? How does a homicide investigation shift when suspicion enters the same family that is publicly mourning? And perhaps the most disturbing question of all, how does justice proceed when the primary suspect is legally protected from public exposure? In the weeks following the discovery of Anna Kepner's death aboard the Carnival Horizon, investigators faced one of the most emotionally and legally complex scenarios in criminal investigations, suspicion reportedly narrowing towards someone within the victim's own travel group, her stepbrother. Family-related homicide investigations carry an immediate psychological tension that investigators cannot ignore. Statistically, homicides involving young victims frequently involve individuals known to them, relatives, acquaintances, or trusted companions. However, every case demands independent verification. Investigators cannot rely on statistical patterns alone. They must construct evidence timelines that can withstand legal scrutiny, public pressure, and emotional devastation. Early investigative procedures focused on reconstructing passenger movements during the cruise. Cruise ships maintain detailed digital logs that track cabin keycard access, onboard purchases, and entry into restricted areas. These digital footprints allow investigators to build minute-by-minute activity records for passengers connected to the victim. Security camera footage from hallways, elevators, and public decks becomes another crucial layer of reconstruction. As investigators examined these records, reports later surfaced in unrelated custody court filings indicating that Anna's stepbrother had been identified by parents as a suspect. The revelation did not come through traditional criminal court announcements. Instead, it appeared buried inside legal filings connected to separate family custody matters. That detail alone introduced a disturbing layer of complexity. Why would such a serious allegation surface in custody proceedings rather than immediate criminal disclosure? And what evidence existed at that stage that prompted the family to acknowledge suspicion internally? Authorities did not publicly confirm suspect identity at the time. Juvenile justice laws strictly limit disclosure of minors' involvement in criminal investigations. These protections exist to balance accountability with rehabilitation possibilities. Court records become sealed, names are withheld, evidence discussions are restricted to courtroom proceedings inaccessible to the public and media. While these legal protections serve long-standing juvenile justice principles, they often create emotional strain for victims' families. Public silence can feel like investigative stagnation. Families seeking transparency encounter sealed documents and limited official updates. Anna Kepner's parents later issued emotional public statements acknowledging the suspect's release into guardian custody. Their statements expressed overwhelming grief while emphasizing their continued trust in investigators. They also revealed that the FBI initially advised the family to remain silent during early investigative stages to protect case integrity. Law enforcement's silence during active homicide investigations serves strategic purposes. Public evidence disclosure can influence witness testimony, compromise suspect interviews, and alert potential accomplices. Investigators often withhold details until forensic analysis, digital evidence review, and legal case construction reach prosecutorial readiness. However, public silence creates psychological tension that can last months or years. Families face unanswered questions, communities seek closure, media organizations attempt to balance responsible reporting with public curiosity. In juvenile homicide cases, that silence becomes even deeper due to legal confidentiality barriers. Meanwhile, investigators continued assembling forensic timelines, behavioral analyses, witness interviews, and digital evidence into a prosecutable case file. Federal prosecutors must meet high evidentiary standards before filing formal charges, especially when defendants are minors. Cases involving maritime jurisdiction add additional complexity because evidence collection must satisfy both federal criminal law and international maritime protocols. As legal proceedings moved quietly behind sealed courtrooms, one reality continued haunting everyone connected to the case. Justice was moving forward, but it was moving in silence. And that silence raises a deeply unsettling question that continues to linger over Anna Kepner's investigation. When a homicide suspect exists within the same family circle as the victim and legal protections shield investigative details from public view, how does society measure accountability? Because somewhere within sealed juvenile court records, forensic laboratory reports, and confidential witness statements lies the truth investigators believe they are slowly uncovering. A truth that remains hidden not because it lacks evidence, but because the law requires patience before revelation. And until that moment arrives, the most terrifying possibility remains this: the answers may already exist. They're just locked behind courtroom doors the public cannot yet open. What happens when a homicide case reaches the courtroom, but the public is never allowed inside? How does justice operate when evidence is presented, witnesses testify, and decisions are made, yet no transcripts, no recordings, and no public timelines ever surface? And perhaps the most unsettling question haunting the Anna Kepner case, when the suspect is legally considered a juvenile, does accountability follow the same path or an entirely different one? As investigators continued building their case surrounding Anna Kepner's death aboard the Carnival Horizon, the legal process quietly transitioned from investigative reconstruction to courtroom evaluation. But unlike high-profile adult homicide trials that dominate headlines and public scrutiny, juvenile homicide proceedings unfold behind layers of confidentiality laws designed to protect the identity and future rehabilitation potential trial of minors accused of serious crimes. Juvenile court systems in the United States operate under a fundamentally different philosophy than adult criminal courts. While adult criminal proceedings emphasize punishment, deterrence, and public accountability, juvenile justice systems focus heavily on rehabilitation, psychological evaluation, and long-term behavioral correction. However, when cases involve violent crimes such as homicide, that philosophical balance becomes intensely controversial. Families of victims often seek transparent justice proceedings, while courts attempt to balance emotional closure with legal protections for underage defendants. In the Anna Kepner case, sealed court records immediately limited public access to investigative progress. Once prosecutors pursue charges against a juvenile suspect, court documentation, including arrest affidavits, forensic evidence summaries, witness testimony, and psychiatric evaluations, typically becomes confidential under Florida juvenile confidentiality statutes. These statutes aim to prevent lifelong public labeling of minors accused or convicted of crimes, especially when courts determine rehabilitation remains possible. However, sealed proceedings create a deeply complex emotional and societal dilemma. Without public court documentation, communities struggle to understand how evidence is being evaluated. Families of victims often receive restricted case updates through legal representatives rather than direct courtroom observation. Media organizations must rely on verified statements from attorneys, investigators, and official agencies rather than direct court transcripts. Juvenile homicide cases often involve a legal crossroads known as transfer hearings or waiver hearings. During these hearings, prosecutors argue whether the juvenile suspect should be tried as an adult. Courts examine several critical factors when making this decision. These include the severity of the alleged crime, the suspect's age, prior criminal history, psychological maturity, and the likelihood of successful rehabilitation within juvenile detention systems. In homicide cases involving older juveniles, prosecutors sometimes push for adult court transfers because adult sentencing structures allow for significantly longer incarceration periods. Juvenile courts typically impose detention limits based on age, often requiring release by early adulthood, regardless of conviction severity. This legal structure becomes emotionally devastating for victims' families who fear permanent loss may result in temporary legal punishment. Reports surrounding Anna Kepner case confirm that the suspect was released into guardian custody following arrest, suggesting courts initially assessed the suspect as not presenting immediate flight risk or community threat requiring detention. However, such release decisions do not indicate case weakness. Juvenile courts frequently allow supervised release, while forensic investigations, psychological assessments, and prosecutorial case preparation continue. Guardian supervision release often involves strict legal monitoring conditions. These may include travel restrictions, mandatory counseling sessions, electronic monitoring, educational program attendance, and frequent court check-ins. Violating these conditions can result in immediate detention reinstatement. Meanwhile, prosecutors must meet extraordinary evidentiary thresholds before advancing homicide trials involving minors. Unlike adult criminal trials where juries assess guilt or innocence, many juvenile homicide cases are decided by judges specializing in youth criminal psychology and behavioral evaluation. Judges review forensic evidence, expert testimony, psychiatric risk assessments, and rehabilitation potential when determining final sentencing outcomes. Another significant complication involves forensic psychiatric evaluation. Courts often require extensive psychological examinations of juvenile suspects to determine cognitive development levels, impulse control capabilities, and emotional maturity. These evaluations may influence whether courts consider suspects fully aware of criminal consequences at the time of alleged offenses. In violent juvenile homicide cases, forensic psychologists examine whether behavioral patterns reflect impulsive emotional escalation or premeditated violent intent. Premeditation findings may increase the likelihood of adult court transfer, while impulsive or emotionally triggered findings may support juvenile rehabilitation sentencing. Anna Kepner's case also involves federal investigative oversight due to maritime jurisdiction, further complicating legal proceedings. When crimes occur aboard cruise ships operating under U.S. jurisdiction, federal prosecutors must coordinate with state juvenile court systems. Jurisdictional collaboration requires careful legal alignment between maritime criminal law and state juvenile sentencing guidelines. Meanwhile, evidence presentation timelines remain highly controlled. Prosecutors must assemble complete forensic analysis, digital communication evidence, witness testimony, and behavioral profiling reports before presenting formal trial arguments. Defense attorneys simultaneously examine investigative procedures, searching for constitutional violations, evidence handling errors, or forensic interpretation inconsistencies that could weaken prosecutorial arguments. Sealed proceedings also limit public exposure to one of the most critical elements in homicide trials: witness testimony. Witnesses who interacted with both Anna Kepner and the suspect aboard the cruise ship may provide timeline verification, behavioral observations, and emotional interaction accounts leading up to the incident. Such testimonies often become decisive factors in courtroom outcomes, but remain hidden from public understanding in juvenile trials. Another critical element involves plea negotiation possibilities. Prosecutors sometimes pursue negotiated plea agreements in juvenile homicide cases to avoid prolonged courtroom trauma for victims' families and witnesses. Plea agreements can involve reduced sentencing in exchange for admission of responsibility. However, families struggle emotionally with plea agreements when they perceive them as reducing accountability severity. Anna Kepner's parents publicly expressed continued commitment to seeking full accountability through legal channels, reinforcing the emotional tension between patience and justice. Their public statements highlighted trust in federal investigators while acknowledging the devastating emotional burden of wading through silent legal proceedings. Meanwhile, legal analysts note that juvenile homicide cases often progress significantly slower than adult trials. Forensic psychiatric evaluations require extended observation periods. Evidence review undergoes stricter confidentiality review. Prosecutorial decisions involving adult drug hearings can take months or years, depending on psychological evaluation results and evidentiary strength. Public frustration surrounding juvenile homicide cases often grows as investigative silence extends. Social media speculation frequently fills information voids, creating misinformation risks that investigators must actively counter through limited but verified official updates. Maintaining case integrity while addressing public curiosity becomes a delicate balancing act for law enforcement agencies. As the Anna Kepner investigation continues progressing through sealed legal channels, one chilling truth becomes increasingly apparent. Justice may be advancing, but it is advancing beyond public view. And that reality leaves one deeply unsettling question lingering long after headlines fade and public attention shifts. If accountability eventually arrives through sealed court rulings, confidential sentencing, and restricted legal disclosure, will society ever fully understand what happened inside that cruise ship cabin? Or will the truth exist only inside courtroom documents that remain permanently hidden from the world she left behind? Because in juvenile homicide cases, justice does not always unfold in public, but its consequences still reshape lives forever. How do investigators reconstruct a crime when no public witnesses step forward, no cameras capture the critical moment, and the only answers may exist inside fibers, fingerprints, and fragments of digital data? What happens when a homicide unfolds inside a private cabin floating miles from land, where every movement must later be reconstructed from forensic traces instead of eyewitness memory? And perhaps the most disturbing question haunting the Anna Kepner investigation: If someone inside that cabin knows exactly what happened, how do investigators prove it without ever having seen it themselves? As federal investigators, maritime forensic specialists, and crime reconstruction experts examined the death of Anna Kepner aboard the Carnival Horizon, they entered one of the most scientifically complex stages of homicide investigation: forensic timeline reconstruction, a process that attempts to rebuild the final sequence of events using physical evidence, biological trace analysis, digital activity records, and behavioral evaluation. Forensic reconstruction begins with environmental documentation. Investigators analyze the physical layout of the cabin where Anna was discovered. Cabin dimensions, furniture positioning, bedding arrangement, ventilation systems, lighting conditions, and soundproofing materials all influence how events may have unfolded. Cruise ship cabins present unique forensic challenges because they combine hotel-style environments with maritime movement conditions. Ship vibrations, constant air circulation systems, and frequent cleaning protocols can disrupt traditional crime scene preservation patterns, forcing investigators to rely heavily on microscopic trace evidence that survives routine environmental disturbances. One of the most critical components of cabin reconstruction involves fiber and textile analysis. Reports indicated Anna Kepner was discovered wrapped in a blanket and concealed beneath bedding materials and life vests. Forensic fiber specialists analyze every textile layer involved. They examine blanket fibers, mattress materials, clothing threads, and life vest fabric compositions, searching for transfer evidence that reveals contact patterns between individuals and objects during the incident. Fiber transfers can reveal physical struggle positioning, movement sequences, or attempts at concealment following death. Forensic teams also examine compression patterns within bedding and upholstery. These patterns can reveal body positioning before and after death, including whether the victim was moved post-mortem. Pressure mapping techniques allow investigators to identify indentations, fold distortions, and fabric stretching consistent with body weight displacement or concealment attempts. In maritime cabins where space is limited, such compression analysis often becomes critical in establishing whether multiple individuals were present during the incident. Biological trace evidence remains another central reconstruction tool. Investigators collect swabs from cabin surfaces, blankets, mattress seams, clothing, and underbed storage areas. These samples undergo DNA analysis, searching for biological transfers, including skin cells, hair follicles, and bodily fluid traces. However, cruise ship environments complicate DNA analysis due to high passenger turnover, shared living spaces, and environmental contamination risks. Forensic analysts must distinguish between routine passenger DNA presence and biological transfers consistent with physical altercation or concealment activities. Another major forensic component involves latent fingerprint and touch DNA recovery. Even in environments subjected to routine cleaning, advanced chemical visualization techniques can recover latent fingerprints from smooth surfaces such as cabin walls, furniture edges, life vest buckles, and electronic devices. Touch DNA, microscopic skin cell residue left behind through physical contact, often becomes decisive evidence when fingerprints are absent or incomplete. Meanwhile, forensic pathologists contribute essential reconstruction data through autopsy findings. Anna Kepner's death certificate classified her cause of death as mechanical asphyxia, indicating external force or obstruction restricted breathing. Medical examiners analyze internal neck structure damage, oxygen deprivation markers in lung tissue, and microscopic bruising patterns to determine compression direction, force duration, and whether suffocation occurred through manual pressure, obstruction materials, or combined methods. Time of death estimation becomes another crucial forensic reconstruction factor. Medical examiners evaluate rigor mortis progression, body temperature decline, lividity distribution patterns, and digestive stage analysis to estimate time of death. Establishing an accurate time of death window allows investigators to compare biological indicators with digital activity logs and witness movement timelines aboard the ship. Digital forensic reconstruction plays an equally powerful role. Cruise ships maintain extensive passenger tracking records through cabin keycard usage logs. Every time a cabin door opens or closes, digital timestamps record entry and exit. Investigators analyze these logs to identify who accessed Anna's cabin, when entries occurred, and how frequently doors were opened during the estimated death time frame. These logs create digital movement maps that investigators compare against physical forensic evidence and witness testimony. Ship-wide surveillance camera footage also contributes to reconstruction. While cabin interiors lack cameras due to privacy laws, hallways, elevators, and public deck areas contain extensive video coverage. Investigators review surveillance recordings frame by frame, searching for behavioral anomalies, emotional confrontations, hurried movements, or individuals transporting objects such as bedding or personal belongings associated with concealment attempts. Another emerging forensic discipline used in complex homicide reconstruction involves behavioral analysis. Behavioral analysts examine interpersonal relationships between victims and suspects. They review communication patterns, emotional conflict history, and stress indicators leading up to incidents. In cruise ship environments where families spend extended time in confined living conditions, behavioral tension can escalate rapidly. Investigators analyze text messages, onboard messaging applications, and social media interactions, searching for escalating disputes, secret meetings, or emotional volatility immediately preceding violent incidents. Digital communication forensic analysis includes recovering deleted messages, examining time gaps in conversation patterns, and analyzing tone shifts indicating conflict escalation. Modern forensic software allows investigators to recover partial data fragments even after deletion attempts, often revealing conversations suspects believed permanently erased. Environmental noise reconstruction also contributes to forensic evaluation. Cruise ships maintain vibration and noise monitoring systems that record mechanical disturbances throughout vessel operations. Investigators analyze whether unusual sound patterns occurred near the cabin during the estimated death time frame, potentially supporting or contradicting witness reports of arguments or physical struggle sounds. Meanwhile, concealment analysis becomes one of the most emotionally disturbing components of reconstruction. The placement of Anna's body beneath bedding and life vests requires investigators to determine whether concealment occurred immediately following death or later in an attempt to delay discovery. Concealment timing analysis examines body temperature retention, fabric moisture absorption patterns, and air circulation impact on decomposition progression. Forensic reconstruction teams often utilize computer-generated crime scene modeling to simulate potential event sequences. These simulations incorporate physical cabin measurements, body positioning data, and movement timeline analysis to test whether suspected event narratives match physical evidence constraints. While simulations do not replace direct evidence, they allow investigators to evaluate whether suspect statements align with scientific reconstruction models. Another vital reconstruction element involves witness recollection comparison. Investigators interview passengers, crew members, and family members separately, documenting their recollections of Anna's behavior, last confirmed sightings, and interactions with potential suspects. Memory timeline comparison allows investigators to identify inconsistencies or corroborate behavioral sequence patterns leading up to death. Throughout forensic reconstruction, investigators must maintain strict evidence preservation protocols. Maritime homicide cases face unique evidentiary challenges because cruise ships continue operating after incidents, exposing crime scenes to environmental contamination risks. Federal investigators often quarantine cabins, restrict housekeeping access, and deploy forensic teams to preserve evidence integrity during maritime transit back to port. As forensic reconstruction progresses, investigators gradually assemble what they believe is the most accurate scientific narrative of Anna Kepner's final hours. Each fiber transfer, digital timestamp, biological trace, and behavioral analysis contribute to a timeline designed to withstand courtroom scrutiny and cross-examination.